We'll get started. We're going to go over some use of force trends, and real basically use of force versus arrests that we've made this year. Now that we've hit the end of the year, Chief's going to talk about that, and then we also have our court hearing with the court-approved settlement agreement that's tomorrow. So in advance of that, we wanted to get this information out and explain it a little bit. With that, I'll get Chief Medina.
I want to thank everybody for being here this morning, and I think it's exciting news. You know, I would hope that a lot of the advocates that are out there, the amici groups, respect the process that has been put in place through the courts, and that they recognize that we have made substantial ground in terms of our ability to, number one, police ourselves as a police department, investigate uses of force, and above all, reduce the use of force that are being used. In 2020, APD had nearly 12,000 arrests, and that number declined over the next couple of years for a variety of reasons. We know that we started holding our officers accountable, and that we had an increase in discipline. We had more scrutiny on our officers, and we've also changed processes, which really hampered our officers' abilities to do their work. Before that, we talked about forced handcuffing and the amount of time that it took out from an officer's being able to be proactive and go out. But I think the most important thing is in 2023, we were back up to almost the same amount of arrests from the past, but under our new system of accountability, reviewing uses of force, we can see that we had a 44% decrease in the uses of force from 2020 till now. So as you look at this first chart, in 2020, 12,351 arrests, with 896 uses of force. In 2021, we saw a decrease, and like I talked about, it's not surprising to me as we had more accountability, we had more officers fearful of doing their job. We had to make changes to the processes under this settlement agreement. And you look where we're at now, and I think that 11,385, that number's changed. I think this number's a little off. It's not the end of year. We'll get that updated number for you. But you look, we're almost back to where we were, and we've decreased uses of force by 469. And I think that's important for us to talk about how we are now doing both. We talked about it as a police department that our goal was to have constitutional policing, for officers to be proactive, but for us to also reduce the amount of force used. This is overall force. We do know that we have a slight decrease from last year, but last year was a number of officer-involved shootings in 2022 and 2023. I think we're at 15 officer-involved shootings, and we're not going to shy away from that fact, but we also are encountering more and more individuals, first, number one, who should have been incarcerated, who had lengthy criminal histories, but were out in the streets, and our officers were attempting to take them into custody for a second, third, fourth, sometimes fifth time. So I think it's important for us to note that, and for us to note that out of our 15 officer-involved shootings, 12 of those individuals were armed, and twice those individuals fired a shot that actually struck one of our officers. So we did have 2 officers struck last year, and we've had more officers struck over the last 2.5 years than we've probably had in any other period of time as a police department. So we'll continue to work on those. We've implemented new processes where we review those officer-involved shootings every 6 months. But for the overall trends, use of force is down 44%. Officer shootings represent less than 3% of uses of force, and the most important thing is we are now able to say 97% of use of forces are within policy. And we know that 95% has been a benchmark in a lot of areas of this settlement agreement. So we will continue to work towards these benchmarks of reducing uses of force, increasing productivity. And I think it's important to remember that even though we're more proactive this year than we have in recent years, our use of force is reflecting that there is a reduction, which to me is a great thing. Some of the reasons why we got here, in January 2023, we made revisions to our use of force to include and expand the use of non-lethal use of force. when taking an individual into custody. We also made changes to the review process. We piloted having a special team come out and review level ones, which was taking a lot of time from officers, and they go into service quicker. In November of 2023, we did reach 94 operational compliance with our settlement agreement with the Department of Justice on our third level. On the primary and secondary compliance, we were at 100, and the only reason we backslid that 90% is 99% from 100 is because of the CPOA and the fact that they're responsible for training their individuals. Arrests, we've taken a proactive approach to policing and ramped up our operations throughout the department. Traffic operations resulted in almost 78,000 traffic citations this past year, as opposed to 2020, when I took over chief, I believe we hit somewhere around the 24,000 mark. Shoplifting operations, I think it's about 360 arrests for Operation Sticky Fingers. Downtown, we continue to have resources out downtown every weekend, enforcing and doing what they can to keep individuals safe downtown, and we've expanded that to all of Central. And we increased the warrant arrests. 25%, I believe, is going to be the final number for the number of felony warrant increases from the previous years. So you can see we're still very proactive. We're out doing our job. Taking individuals into custody and use of force still decreases. So, is that our last slide? So like I said, more contacts with individuals aren't necessarily leading to an increase in uses of force, which is important for us. We continue to see our officers decreasing and de-escalating situations. And the other thing that we are seeing more armed encounters with individuals, and these individuals are not afraid to use their firearm. And that is one category that we are down from 2022 slightly, but we're above what we had been previous years. Es muy importante y hoy queremos hablar de que los oficiales están usando 43% usando force, más less 43%, y que estamos arrestando los mismos número de personas que en otros años como in 2020. So we'll continue to be proactive as we can, and with that we'll go to questions, and we have Major Cottrell here with Internal Affairs if there's any other questions related to uses of force. Yes, Ryan.
You said that there's a hearing scheduled for tomorrow, right?
We have a hearing in federal court tomorrow on our latest monitors report, and we're hoping that this hearing goes in a positive direction and that some major milestones are reached during the hearing.
You said you're hoping for that. Is that expectation? I know we've hit 94%, but there's still some advocates that have some serious concerns.
You know what? I recently learned yesterday that one advocate said they wouldn't be participating. That's unfortunate, and I think that shows a lack of respect for the process. This is a court-appointed monitor. The courts have jurisdiction over all of this, as does the DOJ. And just because one advocacy group isn't getting what they want out of this doesn't mean that you should drop out of the process. It's disappointing, but we'll continue to move forward.
Do you know which one won't be participating?
I understood Peter Kubra stated that his group wouldn't be participating in the court hearings.
The 15 OISs, that's from this past year.
What?
The 15 OISs, that's from this past year.
Yes, 14, sorry, I was off by one.
Of those officer-involved shootings, have officers that have been involved in those shootings been disciplined or fired? If you can talk about that.
Yes, we had officers on the Louisiana incident were terminated, where a civilian was struck, and of those 14 incidents, 12 of the incidents were a result of an individual who was armed with a gun. 2 incidents resulted in an officer being shot, and the other 2 incidents, individuals were armed with bladed instruments. One was a spear, and officers had de-escalated that situation and spoken to that individual extensively for a period of time before this individual rushed officers. And the other was individual armed with a knife on the Louisiana shooting, where we did terminate officers, but that individual had also just stabbed an individual in the drive-thru of a McDonald's.
Now, with the settlement coming to a conclusion, and you did mention the increase in officer-involved shootings, with more people being armed, of course, Is there any concern or plans in place for you guys to be able to address those types of increases moving forward?
You know, I think that one of the best things we've learned from this process with the Department of Justice is how we could reevaluate ourselves. And we've gone above and beyond what the settlement agreement is asking us for. And we now have a 6-month review of all officer-involved shootings. They're just starting the second 6-month review. And if you go back to this first 6-month review, they got 7 recommendations. The second 6-month review, we started working with our new internal monitor from Nevada, who used to work for Las Vegas Metro. They have a plan in place on how we're increasing training, having different training scenarios, on how we're implementing new programs that are going to be coming out in the spring based off of that. And this next 6-month review period, I'm sure, is going to come up with a lot of strong recommendations for us to make differences. So there is always concern when we have officer-involved shootings, but we also have to recognize that we have to be aware of the environment. And unfortunately, this settlement agreement only addresses the Albuquerque Police Department, and it doesn't address the criminal justice system in Albuquerque. I think every citizen in the city of Albuquerque would sit back and say something has changed in the last 5 years in terms of the number of individuals who are out in the community armed since after COVID. It's not just an Albuquerque thing, it's a trend nationwide. There is data supporting that since the pandemic till now, the number of individuals armed with a firearm has increased 4 times what it was pre-pandemic, and this is leading to more officer-involved shootings, not only in the city of Albuquerque, but in a lot of different cities. Not every city has seen this increase, but we are. And it is concerning, but we will continue to make sure that we're looking to see every 6 months what trends there are and how we could address those trends to better equip our officers to avoid the potential use of deadly force.
I want to give you an opportunity to respond to some of those advocates. They filed some letters for the hearing tomorrow. One of them is Mo Maestas' group. One of them says, despite the 94% level of technical compliance noted in the independent monitor report, that 6% reflects a small number in the cost of provisions, but that substance has the magnitude of 94%. Basically saying that they're concerned about the overall culture. That we're checking the boxes technically, but perhaps there's still an issue of really changing the culture. Similarly, APD Forward said that they're profoundly concerned about the extent of which compliance levels reflect that reforms have truly been embraced in the culture of APD. They cite the Mr. Crosby shooting that happened in the parking lot here, last year, as evidence of whether or not culture has really, really changed here. What's your response to that?
Number one, the first question you had there about Mr. Maestas, and we will reach out to Mr. Maestas. There's a complete misunderstanding when you're trying to say, and if I'm taking this correctly, 94% is in compliance, but this 6% has a bigger effect than the 94%. The 3 paragraphs that the Albuquerque Police Department are not in compliance with are, number 1, our PIMS process, which is going to have very little impact on our actual uses of force. Number 2, use of force investigations, which we've already made the corrections for, and EFIT just got released from the process. And number 3, Force Review Board, and I just met with Dr. Ginger a few weeks ago, and he noted that he saw some improvement in what Force Review Board was doing and the processes that Force Review Board has to do. So there's a misunderstanding that, and I think it's really unfair to say that 6% is weighted way more than the under the 94%, when we've already spoken about it. Vast majority of that 6% is civilian oversight, and it has nothing to do with training, policies, and some of those other items that are out there. And that's one of my fears, is that during this process there are going to be, and I recognize this, and I said it in court last time, unfortunately there are going to be advocacy groups that are never going to be happy with the Albuquerque Police Department. We will continue to do our best to try to work with them, to keep the lines of communication open with them, but it's disappointing that everything is pointing that we are falling into compliance, and yet individuals are still unhappy with the outcomes. Society has changed. Unfortunately, we're running into more armed individuals, and I wish that some of these advocacy groups would put some of their efforts towards ensuring that the state legislature works on ensuring that we have the proper funding for substance abuse, the proper funding for maintaining the proper populations within the jail system, and that we'd have the proper funding to make sure that substance abusers get the resources that they need and that they don't have to wait for a long time. Those are all things that the state legislature is in charge of, And quite frankly, Senator Maestas, I'm hoping can go back to Santa Fe and help advocate for those three things that are going to be key to reducing the use of force within the police department.
On that note, with the technical aspects of checking these boxes versus the more ethereal culture within APD, culture is a hard thing to measure, but how can you assure that these groups and other people that the culture is different now than it was years ago?
You know, I simply ask people to look at overall video. Every day people have encounters with the Albuquerque Police Department, and one of the best compliments I get periodically from the public as I make contact with them about somebody who actually had a call for service was the professionalism of our officers. And cultures can take years to change, but I can tell you this much. You look at every one of our shootings and officers are out there, they're giving commands, we are correcting behavior when we have to, we are holding people accountable and we are terminating them when they do make mistakes that they end up violating use of force policies. So we are doing everything we can to change the culture, to hold our officers accountable. But unfortunately, some criminal elements in this community and armed individuals in this community also have to change their culture if they want to see a true reduction in uses of force and officer-involved shootings. So this is a process that's very complicated, and I think it's very unfair for some of these advocacy groups to just point at the Albuquerque Police Department and criticize the officers alone for the situation that we're in when the data is showing that 12 of the 14 were armed with a firearm and the other 2 were armed with blunt instruments.
And all of those account for less than 3% of all the use of force.
And all those account for less than 3% of the use of force. And you look at the data, use of force is down. Under the intense scrutiny that we have, use of force is down 43%. How is that not a change of culture? How is that not the number one measure for the change of culture? Arrests are the same, but overall use of force is down. So we come with data, we come with great information, and I hope that the advocacy groups look at the data and the information and truly fairly process what they're seeing and not go based off emotions. But like I stated, I recognized a long time ago that there will be advocacy groups that do not respect the outcomes of this process. They didn't support APD prior to this process. They were very unfairly critical of APD during several court hearings that I heard us mixed in with state police or where we were mixed in with sheriff's departments. I've heard this for 6 years now, and I'm not surprised that there's some advocacy groups that are not going to support us.
The 40% decrease in use of force, that's dating back to 2020?
That's dating back to 2020. If you see in 2020, we had 896 uses of force, a number of about 12,351 arrests. You see we're similar, 11,385 arrests, and I think that's a little bit higher right now.
Yeah, if you look at the release I handed out, it has updated numbers. This was just through the beginning of December.
So I think they're within 300 of each other or less. And we have 469 uses of force. And if you look back in 2020, look back at the monitor's reports, we were criticized time and time again for failing to identify a use of force. And there was a concern that we didn't identify a use of force and that some may have slipped through the process. Now, we're much better at identifying uses of force and we're seeing a reduction. So I think every indication is that we are seeing a reduction in use of force, and that is a huge change in culture.
Can the increasing number of arrests from 2021, it looks like, be attributed to the type of arrest operations that you were mentioning, for example, the shoplifting, the downtown team?
Yes, but we've become very proactive. Officers feel comfortable in the process. They feel comfortable in everything that's occurring, and they're obviously working as hard as they ever have. Matt?
The officers that were fired for the Salyard shooting on Louisiana, how many officers were terminated?
3 officers were terminated and 1 quit prior to termination.
Okay, and has that been reviewed by the DA's office yet? Do you know?
It's in the process with the DA's office, so we don't know where that's going to come in.
Okay, and do you have numbers on how many warrants APD is cleared by arrest at this time?
Yes, we do have those numbers, and I know it's somewhere up 25% from the previous year, so we could get that to you.
Okay.
Yes, Nick?
Have you invited or asked any of these advocacy groups to go through an RPT training of a shoot-no-shoot situation, and have they accepted?
I believe, have they, Zach, in the past?
Sorry, we did that a couple of years ago. We do meet with them regularly. We haven't this year, but we meet with the advocacy groups regularly to address their concerns. You know, we try to take into account their feelings, you know, towards the process that's going through right now. And we have made great strides with a lot of them. But I think, like Chief said, some of them are just never going to be happy. Some of them are advocating for zero police shootings, which, you know, we don't always put ourselves in those positions. And, you know, we would love for that to happen, but that's not a realistic world. So I think what we have to focus on is that when we do use force, it is constitutional, it is within our policy. I think it's important to remember that our use of force policy is extremely stringent, a lot more stringent than what federal law and case law requires us to have. So when, you know, we see that there's 469, I think to date we have 515, 419 are already closed, but only 3% have been found out of policy. I think that does speak to our training and our culture that we have changed through this process.
You know, and I got to be honest, like these advocacy groups that are really criticizing the process now and not happy with the results, I'm sorry, but as chief of police, I am proud of the direction our officers have gone. I'm proud of the accountability that has been brought to the Albuquerque Police Department. I'm proud that our officers have cut the use of force down by 43% while maintaining the number of arrests. And we're not going to give in to these advocacy groups because they also have to recognize we've had to be fair. We had to make tough decisions. We had to hold our officers accountable. And at the same time, they have to recognize everything that our officers have done to change the culture at APD. And it's just simply unfortunate that they don't have faith in this process, but that's something that they could bring up with the courts.
Chief, can I get you on the Community Policing Council? The chair is one of the people who wrote a letter for the hearing tomorrow saying that they're concerned about the level of support from City Council. They're concerned about the relationship with the city, citing it's difficult to get a meeting with the mayor. They're required to do one a year. They didn't get one for 2022 until January 2023. It's difficult for even some of the APD departments to recognize the legitimacy of what they're trying to do. If this is going to be a continued part of community policing, how can you address the concerns of the chair people that this is not just a dog and pony show, but this is going to go on past DOJ oversight?
I've given my word as long as I'm chief that this will continue. I can't promise anything beyond my tenure as chief. I can't promise anything beyond the mayor's tenure. They may not be happy with the schedule of the mayor, but the fact is the mayor has met with them. And I've been in those meetings yearly. And we have one planned now in the future. I personally go to each CPC at least once to twice a year. I would hope they didn't mention me in there because I have put a lot of effort in working with the CPCs. I recently attended their Christmas dinner, and I think we have a great relationship, and we'll continue to try to introduce more city departments and get more city departments involved. It's an always evolving situation, but if you think about their concerns, going back to 2014, it's great to have those concerns now. We don't get to meet with the mayor much. We don't think all the city departments are involved. We're worried about what's going to happen when CASA ends. In the grand picture of things, and from where we were in 2014 till now, those are just great concerns to have because that right there should show a lot of the other advocacy groups the culture change and the way that we respect community. And the fact that those are the concerns are actually a great thing.
Chief, I wasn't here in 2014, but at the time, I mean, obviously just trying to get caught up on an issue like this. Over the last 3 years, you know, we're seeing the numbers reported. We've had conversations about this type of an issue. I've had conversations with soon-to-be city councilors, people in the community, even the police union, talking about the fact that the police department has been treated unjust for this type of thing, and it has had this type of a microscope over them for the last few years. Would you say that Albuquerque Police Department has been held to an unfair standard compared to other police departments in the country that have higher crime rates or other officer-involved shootings compared to Albuquerque?
You know, and the way I would phrase that is every police department under the same scrutiny as the Albuquerque Police Department? Absolutely not. But we are under a consent decree and they're not. And it doesn't do us any good to argue whether we are held to a higher standard. The simple fact is we are held to a standard because of the position that we put ourselves in. But I think it's also made us a better police department. And I think that I would want to focus on the positive aspects of this. We now have community policing councils that we didn't have in 2014. So we've gone from a process where we didn't have the process to where we have relationships. We've expanded our relationships to religious-based groups. We've used our ambassador program to reach groups that never had a representation or voice with the Albuquerque Police Department that was heard by us. And to me, there's another prime example of culture change. The simple fact that every time there's incidents within certain aspects of the community, that we're able to reach those community members and ensure them that we are hearing their voice, their concerns, and we're giving them resources. And this goes back to the Muslim shootings, the incidents within violence towards the Asian community. This goes back to our protests that we had in 2020 and the relationship we developed with many of the protest organizers. Like, that is culture change that others should recognize, and that they should see that the police department is better at working with the community. So I think that we do a better job at working with the community. This settlement agreement has made us better. But without a doubt, like Major Cottrell said, we have higher standards. And I'm not going to look at this and say it's a negative thing. It's a great thing that we have higher standards. And it's good for the community, and we're glad that we have these higher standards. And the most important thing is there's every indication that we're meeting these standards, and we'll continue to push and ensure that our officers are held to the highest level of accountability, and that we continue to have 12,000 arrests. Because to me, from the very beginning, when I became chief, I knew it was a balancing act. And myself and Mayor Keller pushed back, and we wanted a process that worked for Albuquerque. And we didn't think the process that was in place at the time was taking into account the specifics of the Albuquerque Police Department and the Albuquerque community. And I think we've gotten there to a point where we have a process that works for Albuquerque. It's very successful. Other cities are following through with the same projects, processes that we have, and we get a lot of visitors, and we're continuing to move forward.
Chief, last time we were here, you spoke about less lethal force for officers, and you mentioned the tasers. If the department continues to trend in that direction, how do you see these numbers changing in the future?
You know, we're hoping that always we want to see uses of force down, but we're hoping that some of our changes and our and technology advancements and less lethal options will always reduce deadly force, and we will continue to work on ensuring that we have updated technology. I want to thank the mayor. I want to thank city council. It's our budget that is approved every year that allows us to purchase the less lethal options and the technology we need that we feel is leading to this reduction in force. So we're very fortunate as a department that we're very well supported within city government, and state government gives us funding also, and we hope that we can continue to reduce force and get upgrades in technology that will continue to lead to future success. Yes, Ryan.
I know this was in 2022, but the Crosby shooting that happened in the APD headquarters parking lot, a guy who was known by police who ended up having a nail clippers, a guy with a taser, a guy with a gun. That was cited as one of the examples by one of these advocacy groups that, hey, maybe culture hasn't changed because this was real justified and this is still a problem. I know that one's tricky for a variety of reasons, but what do you have to say about that specific shooting? What, if anything, has been learned about it, and why that's not an example of why the culture is broken here at APD?
One incident doesn't create a pattern. And I think we need to remember that the Department of Justice is here because of a pattern and practice lawsuit. One incident doesn't justify a pattern, and I'm so glad you brought up that example because I think it's important for us to recognize, if you think of where I came earlier and where I was speaking about how it's unfortunate that only APD is being held to these higher standards, I want us to think back of the Crosby situation. Mr. Crosby was in a jail cell. Mr. Crosby was still under crisis. He refused to exit his jail cell to go to court. Mr. Crosby was released from that jail cell. Under crisis, obviously, back to the streets of Albuquerque for our officers to deal with at 2 o'clock in the morning. That is a broken system. We should care for individuals from incarceration to the streets. And there is a lot of failures in the system all along the way, but too many times they only look at the end point, and that happens to be the Albuquerque Police Department. So I think it's important that we recognize we did learn. We are making changes based off of that shooting. We brought in an expert from Nevada who's going to be an external monitor because I got two conflicting reports on that case of results of an internal investigation, what EFIT came out with and what my team came out with. And I'd love to have somebody in the future that I could always have it look at independently that's going to give me the best advice with no ties to the Albuquerque Police Department. So there's a lot of things that came out of the Crosby shooting, and I think one of the biggest things we need to remember is it's unfortunate that the system as a whole failed Mr. Crosby. And I think if everybody goes back and they review that as a case study, they would look to say, should we really have just released him while he was in crisis? Because how you could tell me somebody that's refusing to exit their jail cell and appear in court, and that the right decision is to have this person released back into the streets, that's a failure of the system, and it's beyond the Albuquerque Police Department.
Any other questions? Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.